Matthew chapter 21, beginning in verse number 12. And Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of all those who sold pigeons. He said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers." One thing when I've studied the gospel account of Matthew that has stood out to me over the years, even in our Sunday morning Bible classes that we're currently involved in, is Matthew saw a man, Jesus, with total commitment to God's holiness. In fact, the basic definition of God begins with an understanding of holiness. The problem with a lot of us in today's church, a lot of us try to understand God. Yet the problem is that the basic definition of God is something we fail to understand, and that is we fail to understand God's holiness. You can't understand God if you don't understand the holiness of God. The fact is, God is absolute purity. He is totally free from all evil. He is so removed from evil. He is so able to see evil for what it is. In fact, as Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7 tells us, he cannot be deceived. And even James 1:13 tells us, and he cannot be tempted. Now those qualities, let's go back over them one more time. Absolute purity, totally free from evil, able to always see evil for what it is, not able to be deceived and not able to be tempted. Those qualities go beyond human reality. They are so far removed from our everyday life that it is hard for us to comprehend how there is this that can be in existence. This God that we serve that is totally removed from evil. So we may acknowledge the state of existence, but it is still beyond our ability to comprehend. I accept it. I may not understand it, but I accept it. The Jewish temple, I have loved over the years when I have taken the time to truly study the Jewish temple. It is a fascinating study. It existed because of King David. 2 Samuel chapter 7 verses 1 through 6. It was not created by the command of the Lord, even though the Lord gave his permission. It was not by his command. 2 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 7 and verse 12. It honored God's holiness, as did the tabernacle. Now, if you study the temple very far, you will understand that the temple area served many purposes. You had the assemblies in the courtyards. You had the services of the priest. You had the sacrifices on the altar. You had the representation of the 12 tribes of Israel to God. A place for Israel to appeal to God, etc. Right? Because I can keep on going. Jesus, in our text tonight, was offended on the Father's behalf. Now listen, because this is the crux of the matter. He was offended because the focus of the temple had changed. It had become a place for business instead of a place for the purpose of honoring God's holiness. Now it's true, even at this point, though Israel honored the site as a holy place. There's no doubt about it. And though Israel said what occurred must occur in precisely the right way, here's the key to the lesson tonight. They had become blind to the why of what they were doing. Again, let me say it again. They had everything done in precisely in their mind, according to the law, done in the right way. But they had lost track of the why of what they were doing. In their efforts to honor God in the proper way. In fact, if you go back and you study why this selling was taking place, you'll understand what I'm talking about here tonight. In fact, in their efforts to honor God in the proper way, they were actually offending God. Instead of drawing closer to God, what they were doing is they were placing barriers between themselves and God. And that's where tonight's lesson ends, with this statement. To honor God's holiness in our life, more than doing the right things in the right way is involved. Several months ago, we went through an in-depth study of worship. We saw that over the years, man has traditionally lost focus of the why behind the worship. There are occasions in our life where in our attempt to honor God, we actually become an offense against God. And traditionally that happens when we lose sight of God's holiness. When we worship together, we are surrounded by God's holiness. His presence is ever near us. We should never lose sight of the why in which we worship to honor that holiness. Tonight we're going to sing this song of encouragement, and I can't even begin to fathom in my life the number of times that I have in my actions or my inactions offended God, or not lived up to the standard of holiness that I should exhibit in my life, the Christ likeness that I should exude from my life. Thanks be to our holy God, who does not know evil, that He still knows grace. I mean, folks, I can't tell you tonight, we're about to go out and do some fun things together and hopefully lift up some spirits, but none of that's possible without grace. So tonight, if you need the prayers of this church, we can assist you. If you need a taste of God's grace by putting your life into His hands in baptism, then we want to help you tonight as we stand and sing together.